Episode 32, 29, The Final Cycle Completes. Chapter 29, The Final Cycle Completes. 500 Years of Pain. The hallway was long, tiring. Like a path to darkness that would never end. 500 years of suffering. A metal gate loomed in the distance, a bright light shining through the opening. Like a portal to another world. 500 years of sacrifices. Like the point of no return. And 9 lifetimes of war. He gazed forward, his eyes cold. Let's go. A tale of much pain. A tale of much sorrow. With steeled hearts, with resolute determination, they entered the light. It will all soon end. The travelers strode in silence, advancing through the different areas of Miria Station, watching the interior design change from the grassy Eden to red metal walls, then to grey metal walls. The floor covered with dull grey tiles, the metal doors slid open easily as they approached. However, when they stepped inside, all they could see was darkness, save for the dull light above the door. Then, the room began to grow brighter and brighter, until they could see their surroundings. A grey prison-like square room. Filled with 5 giant white roosters. Ryu and Ray glanced at each other. These roosters reminded them of their infiltration of McNeil's manor 10 years ago. Was it just a coincidence they looked just like the giant rooster they fought then? Ray shrugged and defeated them easily with a lightning spell, allowing them to access the door on the other end of the room. Another room came into view. This time with 3 familiar creatures. New. Ryu's eyes narrowed, his heart throbbing with the pain of remembering the painful lesson with the new from 10 years ago. He was beginning to suspect the goddess was up to something. The series of rooms they passed after that confirmed their suspicions. They were fighting monsters they had defeated before in the past. 3 huge slugs, the same as the mutated creature that had tried to devour Momo in her father's plant in Windia. The angler, the giant fish they pulled up from the bottom of the sea onto Steel Beach near Junk Town. 2 ammonites, the very same creatures that had attacked them on the Black Ship during their journey across the outer sea. The Manmo, the hairy monster that had caused Nina to collapse from heat stroke in the Desert of Death. Then, 3 of Stallion. The combined form of Balio and Sunder they had fought on Makis Bridge. 2 of Mikba, the monstrous lizard form of the Dawn of Sin City, whom Ray pursued for revenge. Even Geist. The demonic form of Other Guardian who died to free D's. It stunned them to silence. Geist. Gar gripped his halberd tightly. What purpose lies in repeating our past battles? Ray growled. I bet she's mocking us. Ryu didn't reply. They continued on, past the grey rooms into a wide hallway, barely bright enough for them to see. Green lights shone dimly from the crystal spheres along the walls, as though watching their every move as they strode apprehensively towards the end. A great metal gate, thicker than a wall, soon blocked their way forward, showing no indication of opening. Immediately knowing what to do, Honey jumped from her mistress' pocket and stepped forward. A thin green ray shone from her head to the green crystal on the center of the gate, causing the vertical crack in the center of the gate to shine an eerie crimson. When the crimson light faded away, the gate opened, the first half slid sideways into the walls, then the second half lowered into the ground, leaving the path open for them to pass. Suddenly, a rectangular green image formed above the opened gate, with the face of an orange-haired woman, with a golden circlet around her head.
Navigator code for the highest level functions accepted,
a metallic voice announced from the image.
Access to library granted.
With that, the image disappeared. Ray rubbed the back of his head.
Man! How can she be so small and still open such a huge door like that?
Momo beamed.
You're amazing, you know that, honey?
Honey rubbed the back of her metal head, embarrassed. Beyond the gate was a sturdy lift that, unlike the others they had boarded in this place, had no control panel and descended automatically when they all stepped onto it. Further and further down it descended, a long distance into the deepest depths of Miria Station. They could feel that they would soon meet the goddess. Ray swished his tail about.
Well, I'm a little nervous.
Nina smiled sheepishly.
Me too. I'm more excited than nervous,
Momo declared, spreading her arms.
I mean, look at this. It's like we're in the age of machines all over again.
The half-tiger slapped his forehead.
You and your machines.
Ryu didn't join in the conversation. He merely stared at the passing metal wall, lost in his thoughts. Gar, his expression grim, stood beside him.
We are soon to arrive. The goddess' residence is but within the library.
He turned to face him.
You've been here before.
He nodded.
Never once by foot, always by portal, for I am sometimes summoned by the goddess. But no longer.
His eyes grew distant.
Perhaps, by choosing to bring you to meet her, I am no longer in her service.
He lowered his gaze.
I'm sorry.
The guardian smiled slightly.
It is by my own choosing that I brought you here, Ryu. There is naught to apologize for.
Ryu smiled as well.
Okay.
The lift began to slow down, bringing their conversations to an end. At the bottom of the long shaft, it stopped without as much as a hiss, and the metal gate before them parted to let them pass, revealing a dark room. They stepped from the lift apprehensively, wondering this place was like the prison-like rooms where they had fought their past opponents. When they were barely a foot away from the gate, the arrows on the center of the floor and the lines on the walls began to light up, starting with the ones on their end and gradually spreading to the other side, revealing a long hallway. The moment the lights reached the opposite end, the faded image of an orange-haired woman in a long emerald-green dress appeared, with a golden circlet around her head. Exactly the same woman who had appeared when Honey opened the gate before.
Welcome,
the same metallic voice came from her.
We serve the Almighty Goddess. Before you meet with the Holy Miria, please hear our words. Is she ahead?
Ryu asked grimly. She nodded.
The Holy Miria awaits you ahead.
The Dragon Prince nodded at his companions, who returned the gesture, and they all walked past the woman and through the wide door at the end. Beyond the door was a gigantic room, with winding platforms that led to doors to rooms, circled around the room like a coiled snake. A serene blue light shone from the edge of the dark metal floor, along with lights from dark blue crystal spheres on the walls. As the group strode across the platforms, they met more of these orange-haired women with the exact same faded appearance, some speaking through a rectangular green image with only their face showing. Each and every one of them had words of praise for the goddess.
Before the coming of Holy Miria, the world was dying. The wounded earth was covered in sand, and the very life was being sucked out of its inhabitants. The grieving Miria used all of her divine power to divide the world into two halves. One half being where you are now, the desert of death, and the other, the world you came from, overflowing with life. separated by the vast and violent ocean you call the outer sea, which protects your world from the desert. It is Miria's desire to protect life, to protect your world. Even a monster's life is sacred to her. In order to protect the life she so loved, Miria instituted many forms of safeguards and controls. Foremost among these is the control of technology. She makes certain that no dangerous machines, like weapons, are developed, only allowing the use and repair of existing machines, keeping the study of machines from leading to potentially destructive ends. Another control is achieved through the energy of chrism ore, which is the fossilized remains of living beings, transmuted by the blessed power of the divine Miria. Chrism ore is no more than one of the ways Miria provides the world with her magical energy.
Ryu's heart was filled with doubt. While he was gone in past the 400 years, Miria had done nothing but to help this world. Was Teepa right after all? Were they, the brood, the ones who had wrought war to this world instead of protecting the world like they were led to believe? They had fought the battles to near extinction. So many sacrifices were made, so much pain and suffering was brought upon them. Were they all pointless? He didn't know anymore. Finally, the long platform ended, leading to a lift that would lead them to their destination. They stepped onto the thin metal platform, surrounded by protective fence, and with the guidance of a moving stream of light, the lift carried them upwards to a much higher platform, nearly wide enough to cover the whole room. The floor was dark, tiled with black, but the walls, like the hallways, shone with lines of light. The lift stopped with barely a jerk, and one side of the protective fence lowered to allow them to pass. They stepped off the lift apprehensively, looking around the platform. It was then when Ryu's prana shone. The warm energy rose inside him, gathering at his forehead in the form of a golden light. The sphere of light appeared above his head and a thin beam of light extended from it, cutting through the air to another golden light in the center of the room. As the light disappeared, a young woman materialized in the air before them. She had the most beautifully shaped face, her pink lips curled in a serene smile, her fair skin glowing ethereally. Her elegant dress was made from a pink material that glowed, her long silky golden hair danced playfully with the hem. Behind her, the feathers of her 4 angel wings shone with different colors that changed every second. It was the person they had been seeking for so long. The goddess Miria. She gazed at them in turn.
Ray, Nina, Momo, Guardian Gar, and Ryu.
They looked up at her, with Nina, Ray and Momo wondering how she knew their names. Ryu merely glared at her coldly, unable to forget the past wars against her. The goddess smiled.
My brave, strong children, who crossed the violent ocean and the burning desert. No doubt you have questions in your mind.
She spread her hands.
I am Miria.
Gar bowed respectfully.
Milady, we have journeyed far seeking you, that we might know the truth.
He turned his eyes upwards at her.
O goddess, tell us. Why did the brood have to be destroyed? Is there anyone who wishes the destruction of life? I certainly do not. But the power of the brood was too great. Too great for my small world. Okay, so Ryu has power that's on a completely different level from us, but he's the only one who can use it now.
Ray crossed his arms.
In your small world, there are also others who have powers that are just as dangerous.
He held a hand to his chest.
Like my uncontrollable war tiger form.
She nodded slowly.
That is also the result of the brood. Long exposure to their great power, their very existence, gave the destructive powers that other races now possess.
She gestured towards the half-tiger.
Such is your transformation. Mikbas. Stallions.
She gestured towards Nina.
And the Windian's wings.
Nina gasped.
Even my wings were given by the dragons.
Gar closed his eyes.
Such is the power of the brood. Power that no race should have.
The goddess shook her head sadly.
But, once the brood are gone, there will be no more of these destructive powers. I will be able to protect my small world. As you know, this side of the world is almost entirely buried by sand. Life has been driven nearly to extinction. I have to preserve what little is left. I have to save the rest of the world from the danger called the brood. So what you're saying is...
Ray rubbed the back of his head.
We should sit back and let you take care of us, like we're your babies or something, right?
She smiled placidly.
Exactly, Ray. If I did not hold the desert back using the outer sea as a shield, the desert would slowly, inevitably spread across the entire world. If I did not continue to create the machines that are repaired and used worldwide, civilization as we know it would surely perish. But while we don't have the means now, someday we might be able to build our own machines,
Momo argued.
If the world were covered with sand, your lives would be consumed with the struggle to survive. You would not be able to build anything, and even if you succeeded in creating the machines you needed.
She gazed at the engineer.
Can you say with certainty that you would not also build a weapon with which you might also destroy yourselves, Momo? Well.
She could find no answer.
In the past, this world was larger than you can imagine. Many people once lived here in Kairshan. But they fought and quarreled among themselves, and finally the city was swallowed by the desert. I was unable to protect them.
She shook her head forlornly.
I will not make the same mistake again. Miria,
Ryu interrupted, finally speaking, his eyes harsh.
Why don't you throw away that facade? It must be really tiring to keep it up for so long. Facade?
Nina echoed. At first Miria merely gazed at him, smiling serenely. Then she unexpectedly laughed, a high laugh that destroyed the very image of a holy goddess they had in mind.
My, Ryu, you're as sharp as ever. What am I going to do without you looking to defeat me every time? I'll die of boredom.
The other five were stunned, their mouths wide open. The Dragon Prince chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice.
You never change, Miria. Is it that fun to play the holy goddess who does her utmost to protect a dying world by ridding the world of evil dragons?
Miria nodded.
Yes, it's quite so, much better than staying in that boring old god's realm.
His voice lowered to a dangerous level.
Even manipulating Tipo.
She laughed again, quite enjoying herself.
That drama was the best part. A boy who wishes to be with his family, yet fighting his own kind for the sake of a false belief.
Tipo's soul inside Ryu stirred, anger filling the latter's heart. Ray's expression was grim.
So you mean to say, the world is just a small plaything for you? Even the people's lives?
The princess shook her head.
How awful.
Gar closed his eyes.
Milady. But of course.
The goddess smiled.
I was serious about protecting this world. Who wouldn't take care of their prized possession?
Nina looked up at the goddess courageously.
I understand what you were trying to say before. We're weak, and maybe we do need help and protection, and the power of the brood may be similar to the power that destroyed this city long ago.
She spread her hands.
But flaunting your power, forcing people to follow your rules, putting yourself in a position of power for fun? Even if you're serious about protecting this world, what are we supposed to do? Are you saying Ryu must die, or live alone in an artificial world? Like Tipo.
Tipo's soul stirred again.
No kidding.
The half-tiger shrugged.
I don't like the fact that all this is being controlled by you, that you're pulling all the strings. Especially when you're doing it for fun.
He drew out his dual daggers.
I'm just like a little kid, you see. If you tell me to sit still, it just makes me want to run around more. Although all this brood stuff is too big for me.
Momo's eyes shone with the same determination.
But I do know we'll survive even without your protection. Humans are not that weak, that's why we have the ability to evolve. We'll learn, we'll be able to build the machines on our own. Milady.
Gar shook his head.
We have no desire to surrender Ryu, nor do we wish to see him killed.
He raised Geist's halberd.
Having traveled with him, I believe not that the power of the brood is as fearsome and dangerous as you claim it to be. I'm shocked that nearly the entire world is covered by sand,
Nina continued.
But with Ryu's, with our power working together, then maybe, just maybe.
Miria's eyes flashed dangerously, her manner of speech reverting to that of her holy personality.
Enough.
A ring of golden light spread from her.
I admire your bravery and courage, Ray.
Ray disappeared away, like a cluster of sand blown away by the wind.
Ray!
Momo cried.
There is no need to worry. I will erase your memories of this place and simply return you to where you belong, Momo.
Another ring of golden light spread from her. Momo vanished the same way. She turned to the princess.
My strength is admittedly small. But it is all you have to live with. With power comes the responsibility to protect. Do you understand, Nina?
As the light flashed again, Nina held her hands forward as though she could stop it with an invisible barrier. But she faded away like sand as well. Boiling with anger, Ryu trembled, his hand on the hilt of his sword.
Thank you for bringing Ryu here, Guardian Gar. Your mission is now complete.
Gar vanished with a final ring of golden light. The Dragon Prince gritted his teeth, rage rising from within him. He was ready to step forward, ready to strike the goddess down that very moment. But then, Pico unexpectedly stepped forward and raised his head. There was another flash of golden light, this time gathering around him, and as the light disappeared away, all his vanished companions reappeared at his side. Relief washed over Ryu.
Everyone! You seem to have forgotten me, Miria.
The onion spoke, turning towards the goddess.
You did not call out my name. Do you not know this old one?
Stunned, Miria shook her head disbelievingly.
You're Yggdrasil.
Everyone else gasped, staring at their little onion friend. Ryu then chuckled lightly.
Yggdrasil? So you've been with me all along?
Pico nodded.
I have been watching you, Ryu. It is time this old one lends you his hand.
He looked up at the goddess.
Miria. You have caged this world enough.
Miria laughed, returning to her playful demeanor.
Cage them? All I'm doing is leading my dear children by the hand. giving them a world they can live in.
The onion shook his head.
These so-called children crossed the entire world to get here and overcame the myriad barriers you set before them. All for the sake of helping their friend, Ryu, to find his destiny. They are not as weak as you make them to be.
She stopped, looking thoughtful. Some minutes later, she nodded.
Very well, we will let Ryu decide. Me?
The young man said in surprise. She nodded.
What will you do? If you give up your power, the world will continue to live under my protection, as it is until now. Your power, which brought you here, is too big for it. Talk to your companions and decide.
She smiled.
But you will accept your fate, my Ryu.
He doubted it, but he remained silent as he turned towards his companions.
Pui, Ryu.
Pico spoke first.
You have to believe in yourself, and those who believe in you.
He nodded.
Thanks, Yggdrasil. Thanks for being with me.
Nina shook her head.
To tell the truth, I'm really frightened, we're not strong at all. If you go against fate, something awful might happen to the world. But...
She embraced him momentarily, smiling.
I've always believed you weren't a bad dragon. I'll always believe that, no matter what happens.
He returned the smile.
Thanks, Nina. I only know how to fix machines,
Momo admitted sheepishly.
But we can always dig up those machines, even if they're buried under a desert, and learn from them.
She grinned.
Even if the world is covered in sand, we'll still be able to do something as long as we don't give up. Right. That's right.
Ray agreed.
We're not as strong as you or Miria, but that doesn't mean we can't do anything. But more than that.
His eyes darkened.
It's because of all the nonsense she's going on about that Tipo ended up the way he did.
Ryu could feel Tipo's soul inside him stirring, sadness filling his heart.
She messed with my brother.
The half-tiger growled.
That's one thing I can't forgive. Ray. Ryu.
Gar shook his head, a forlorn expression on his face.
I brought you here simply because I wished to know the truth about my own actions. It may have been a selfish reason, but I have learned one thing from this journey.
Determination gleamed in his eyes.
Now, more than Miria, I trust you, Ryu. Thanks, Gar.
Ryu smiled appreciatively, glancing at each of his comrades.
Thanks, everyone.
Now that he had spoken to all of his companions, the Dragon Prince faced Miria. It was a decision he couldn't handle lightly, for the fate of the world now hung in balance. To give up the power of the brood and live in a peaceful world watched over by the goddess? Or believe in the power of the brood and travel into the empty desert where unknown dangers awaited? He remembered the wars he had fought, the deaths of the people he had led against the goddess. He remembered the pain, the suffering of the people during the wars, the hopelessness that hung in the air during the Dragon War 400 years ago. He remembered Tipo's words, that they were all a warring race, bringing forth destruction to the world. And Miria had done nothing but protect the world in the 400 years he was gone. Was the war all for naught? Did their purpose, why the brood crossed the boundaries of the two worlds, disappear with the flow of time? Must he fight? Or must he live as Tipo had done all these years? Fear filled his heart. The responsibility weighed on his shoulders. He didn't know. He didn't know what to do.
I know I've said it before, Ryu, but I'll say it again,
Lawton spoke into his ear.
This is your consciousness. The choice is yours, and yours alone.
But everyone's depending on me.
Forget you're the prince for now. Forget you're part of the brood. Just think of yourself as a person.
The silhouette of the dragon god stood before him, the golden eyes focused on him.
Do you really feel your journey was pointless? That nothing came from it?
My journey? Memories from all of his 10 lives came into mind. Traveling from his remote, secluded village to all kinds of places, experiencing the different wonders of the world. The joy from helping people, the fear of failing, the triumph of succeeding. Meeting new friends of all shapes and sizes, the wind Ians, the Warrens, the grass runners, and many more. Bonding with them, laughing with them, fighting along their sides. Meeting Nina. The love that filled his heart. His eyes snapped open, determination burned from within him. He knew. There was only one reason he could have experienced all of his. Why did he even hesitate? His decision was made.
I'm sure you already know what my choice is, Miria.
He gazed at the goddess.
I can't give up this power.
Miria's expression hardened. He closed his eyes.
Of course I thought about my people, their spirit driven into madness after death. About my destiny, and Tipo. But there's something more important.
He looked over a shoulder, gazing at his friends, who reassured him with smiles and thumbs ups, and faced the goddess once more.
This power. No, this very life was given to me by Lord Loudon. Without it, I wouldn't have even been born.
He raised a hand to his chest.
Because I was born into this world, weak though you say it is, I was able to experience many things. Pain, sadness, anger, hatred, relief, friendship, happiness. Hope. What are you saying, Ryu?
Miria demanded. He smiled.
If I give up this power, then I wouldn't be myself anymore. Because of this power, because of this life. I am Ryu. Ryu.
Loudon's voice was filled with awe. The goddess' eyes flashed.
Do you realize what you're trying to do, Ryu? By making me your enemy, you realize you're making the whole world your enemy, don't you? I have faith in you. That the brood are not so foolish.
She spread her hands.
Come. Lower your weapon.
Ryu felt it would be foolish to challenge a goddess. But he knew, the brood were once gods as well. He was part of a god who had guided him throughout his lives. He had faith in the power given to him. With a yell, he drew out his sword and, in one swift motion, swung his blade, but in the blink of an eye, Miria faded away and reappeared above him.
My poor Ryu. Your great power has driven you mad.
She laughed.
What of those who don't have such power? They can't live without my protection. By not giving up your power, you threaten their very existence.
She shook her head.
Just as I always believed, the brood are truly a danger, a threat to the world. An obstacle to me. It is not true, Miria.
Pico interrupted.
It only means life is no longer content to live in the little cage you have made for it. Life in your world has been protected from the desert and death. But that is not the same as living. Enough.
Miria growled, fury flashing in her eyes.
Ryu, son of the accursed Loudon. The time for talk is over.
Her features slowly turned a ghastly color, reminding the others of a zombie.
You have been here again and again, always stopping me. I always hoped you would betray Loden to join me, like your dragon friend.
Suddenly she screamed, a mournful howl in the air, as everything in the room grew dark. The floor they were on shook violently, as though trying to shake them off, but gradually became still as red lines of light flashed across the walls. It felt as though the platform was continuously traveling through a revolving portal, past the point of no return. Facing the demonic form of the goddess. The head of the body was covered in golden hair, with her human form in front instead of a face. She retained her pretty face, the upper half of her body naked, with great pink wings replacing her arms. Gigantic red horns extended from the side of the golden hair, connected to the extremely long and wide body of a striped serpent that coiled easily as she floated.
You will stop me no more, Ryu!
She cried, a high voice and a deep voice at the same time.
For the sake of my world, I will kill you!
They didn't wait for her to strike first. Ray and Gar charged forward, weapons raised in preparation to strike, with Nina and Momo's spells, accompanied by Pico's fire breath, rushing over their heads towards the goddess. Ryu growled and leaped into the air with a great burst of light, great wings spread by his sides, and took on the warrior dragon form. Miria's eyes flashed dangerously as a thin ray of dark light shot forward, barely missing Ray and Gar. Nina, Momo, and Pico scattered hurriedly, causing the ray to burn a hole in the metal ground, from whence dark mist burst into the air like a geyser. The half-tiger, with a loud cry, leaped high into the air, landed on the striped serpentine body and, gripping his dual daggers tightly, slashed twice as hard as he could. They barely scratched the scales. Miria's stomach suddenly bulged, as though something was trying to force its way out. Struck by a sudden fear, Ray quickly jumped back, shielding his face with his arms. But he wasn't fast enough. 3 snakes burst out of the goddess' stomach, teeth flashing in the crimson light on the walls. Ray's eyes widened. His mouth opened in a silent scream. He fell towards the ground, the daggers falling from his limp hands, blood trailing in the air.
Ray!
Momo shrieked, her hands glowing with her strongest healing spell. Snarling, the warrior dragon swooped down like a great eagle, catching his old friend before he hit the ground. Gar, rushing forward from under him, jumped as high as he could and swung his halberd with all of his strength, aiming for the snakes. One snake gave a sharp hiss before its head was severed from its body. The rest of them returned to the goddess, her stomach reverting to its original form as though nothing had happened. Miria's eyes blazed with rage, furious at the sight of her own guardian betraying her. She fired another ray of dark light towards him, and Gar, caught off guard, was unable to evade. The ray struck him squarely in the chest, knocking him forcefully onto the ground, his halberd sliding across the floor several feet away from him. Dark mist engulfed him, burning him like a burst of flames would a plant. The guardian, who rarely fell in battle, was easily felled by the sheer power of the goddess. Forced to the ground despite his great endurance. Ryu growled. He placed Ray on the ground next to Momo and soared into the air once more, transforming into the Force Dragon in a burst of light. He roared, charging towards the goddess in a sudden burst of speed, and lashed out with his fangs. 3 magical claw marks, blazing with crimson flames, slashed across the goddess in a flash of light. Miria shrieked in pain, her serpentine body writhing, with 3 new burning wounds. He lashed out once more, allowing no mercy to enter his heart. But it wasn't enough to defeat her. With a shriek, her face opened up like a budding flower. Where her face once was, a hole was there, plainly for everyone to see. Blood dripped from the roof of the hole, sliding down her neck. Ryu inhaled sharply, momentarily stunned by the ghastly appearance of the goddess. That momentary pause cost him. Suddenly, with a great explosion of light from the hole in her face, a ray of dark light stabbed Ryu like a gleaming javelin, grabbing hold of him like a gigantic hand. Pain cut through every part of his body, burning him from the inside like a searing blade of flames. He roared in pain, his roar resonating along the walls of the room.
"No, Ryu!"
Nina shouted, her wand glowing dazzlingly.
"Sirocco!"
Fireballs rushed from her wand and towards Miria, exploding in a great burst of flames the moment they touched her.
"Ragnarok!"
Momo yelled, raising a glowing hand into the air. The room became dark, so dark that they could not see each other. A small star blinked in the darkness above, followed by many other stars, then, without warning, comets rained down from the sky, crashing down with tremendous force on the goddess.
"Pyukyuo!"
Pico cried, releasing a wave of flames. Miria shrieked with pain, struck by explosions, comets, and flames. Her attention momentarily distracted, the dark light around Ryu faded away, freeing him from its hold. He immediately retreated, landing heavily on the metal platform with quickened breath. But the goddess would not sit there and let the spells continue to strike her. With a shrill cry, she spread her wings to her sides, creating a magical wall of ice that became her barrier against the spells. The three refused to stop. They unleashed even more power into their spells, hoping they were strong enough to break the barrier. Yet the ice wall stood resiliently, showing no signs of cracking. Miria grinned.
"Foolish mortals!"
And, with a sweep of a wing, giant icicles stabbed upward from the ground like jaws of a shark, rushing towards them furiously as though ready to devour them. Nina and Momo screamed, covering their eyes. The Dragon Prince, his heart cold with fear, rushed towards them, roaring their names. But, even they he could not protect. The avalanche of ice overwhelmed them. Buried them alive. Then silence filled the air. He snarled. "No. I must protect them." His throat filled with energy, he unleashed a burst of flames onto the ice, hoping that it would melt quickly. Again and again the flames struck the ice, yet it stood its ground, undaunted. His strength wasn't enough. No. Ryu, unknowing reverting to his human form, sank to his knees. His eyes focused on the mound of ice, unable to take them away.
"Nina! Momo!"
He shook his head.
"Pico!"
He turned around. Ray, clutching his bloody wounds. Gar, breathing heavily on the ground. His companions, all removed in an instant. Because he had chosen to fight the goddess. Because he wasn't strong enough to protect them. He shut his eyes. Maybe I shouldn't have chosen this selfish path.
"A little too early to give up, don't you think?"
A familiar voice told him.
"Inferno!"
He looked up sharply. A pool of lava gathered around the mound of ice, then, abruptly, pillars of flames shot upward like dragons reaching for the sky, quickly melting the ice. Within a few seconds, the ice was gone, revealing Nina, Momo and Pico, who were shivering with cold but fine otherwise. Ryu's heart leaped.
"Why? You're fine." "You're an idiot, Ryu,"
the familiar voice spoke again. He turned to face the voice, his eyes wide.
"Lady D's."
It was certainly Dee's, her arms crossed as she slithered across the floor towards him.
It's a good thing I decided to come here.
She sighed.
What are you doing, Ryu?
He felt confused.
What? I'm doing.
She suddenly raised her voice, making him draw back in fear.
You can handle this battle. Why aren't you using your full power yet? You're still doubting yourself. The dragons, when gathered, have the power to destroy the world if they all unleash it at the same time, but you alone, you won't be able to.
She swung a hand.
So what are you waiting for? Throw Loden's full power in her face.
Realization filled him. He had been afraid to use his full power in fear of destroying the world. He had never once used all of it before. With his warriors, he had always been able to defeat the goddess without using much of his power. But now, when he was alone with his companions, he realized he didn't know the full extent of his power. Is it okay for me to use all of it? Loden chuckled.
Why are you asking me? You heard what Dees said. Go wild.
Ryu laughed to himself. Thanks, Lord Loden. His heart was set. Determination burned within him. He rose to his feet, his eyes gazing resolutely towards his centuries-long enemy. He would use all of his power and not regret it. There was nothing left to restrain him. Dees approached the goddess, her snake tail trailing behind her.
Miria.
Miria shook her head.
Sister.
Ryu heard gasps from behind him.
Sister.
Ray spluttered.
They're sisters.
The half-snake gazed upward at her sister.
Aren't you tired of this, Miria? Aren't you tired of this war?
Miria growled.
I'll do what it takes to protect my world. Even if it includes killing you. Looks like I still can't change your mind.
A sigh came from her as a wand materialized in her hand.
We'll have to fight this out again.
Miria shrieked, spreading her pink wings to her sides.
This will be the last.
Suddenly, everything grew dark, darker than a moonless night. Heavy footsteps sounded in the air, as if belonging to gigantic suits of armor. All of them gazed upward and froze in fear. Giant crimson skeletons approached them, a dark mist obscuring everything below their waists. They cackled loudly at them in hoarse voices, as though mocking them. Then, deep crimson light engulfed all 7 of them, the color of blood. Dark mist rushed towards the ceiling from them, gathering in the sky. Ryu suddenly felt his strength leaving him. Breathing quickly, he tried to remain standing, but his struggle was futile. His legs buckled beneath him, forcing him down to his knees, leaving him with little strength to even lift his sword. From the corner of his eyes, he could see the others deeply affected as well. He gritted his teeth.
You're right, this will be the last battle, Miria.
Energy surging through his veins, he threw his head upwards and gave a yell.
I'll be the one to end it.
A bright white light surrounded everyone, overwhelming the crimson light and dark mist, and a roar rang across the room just as the surroundings returned to its original state. And, above them, the radiant dragon floated serenely, his golden white scales like sunlight. With his feathery white wings, he had an even more holy appearance than the goddess when they first met her. A gentle cry resonating, white sparkles rained down onto his 6 companions, restoring their strength, healing their wounds. Ray unexpectedly found himself completely healed, and Gar was able to stand properly. The others stood up slowly, their strength restored. Then, a ferocious roar cutting the air, a bright light flashed across the room once more. Great wings of light spread open, illuminating the room, golden scales reflected the light. The Kaiser Dragon. The last of the brood. With azure eyes that burned with determination.
The Kaiser?
Miria laughed, though there was no humor in her voice.
Never before have you used this form against me. Don't you have a care for the world anymore?
She snarled.
Then I shall use my full power against you.
Purple lightning sparks shot uncontrollably all over the place as strong dark light surrounded her. The platform rumbled as the same dark light covered it. Then, with a great howl, she spread her wings, unleashing all of her powers. A huge ray of dark purple light shot towards them. Hot energy surged at lightning speed in Ryu's veins, circling again and again until it burned him from the inside, aching to be released. His eyes narrowed, his heart determined, he released the power in a great burst of light, a powerful ray of intense white light. The two rays clashed in the center. An explosion of both white and dark light spread to all corners of the room, blinding everyone in sight. The air became dense with energy, filled with so much pressure that rocks floated in midair. The pressure grew and grew to the point it forced the other six down to their knees once more. The force of the conflict of powers tore at the walls of the room, creating cracks on them. Debris and broken pieces of machinery, torn from the walls, circled around them like a giant vortex. Miria cackled loudly, the dark light around her shining even stronger.
Die!
Ryu resisted, gritting his teeth as his power was forced back. The conflict of the rays approached him slowly, coming nearer and nearer, like a great snake ready to strike its target. But he was already using everything he had. Was the goddess power truly greater than his?
Ryu!
Nina shouted from below.
Don't ever give up. I believe in you. Yeah, Ryu.
Momo agreed.
You've already come this far, don't let it end like this. Damn it, Ryu!
Ray yelled.
This isn't the Ryu who beat me as a war tiger. You're made of stronger stuff. Think of your brethrens, Ryu.
Gar bellowed.
Think of your brethrens who have fallen in battle. Think of Tipo.
Deez added.
Believe in yourself, Ryu.
Pico cried.
Believe in the power Lord Loden gave you.
Lord Loden's power?
Yes. The power I've given you, Ryu,
Loden said, his golden silhouette standing beside him, thrusting a finger forward at the goddess.
The power of a god from the god's realm, equivalent to Miria's. 2 gods, Loden, not 1.
An unfamiliar male voice corrected.
I'm tired of sitting here in God's realm and watching Miria do as she likes. Channel my power to your warrior, Loden. And mine.
A female voice cried.
Mine, too.
Several other voices yelled at the same time, all volunteering, their voices entering Ryu's mind through Loden. Each of the gods channeled part of their power, combined into an enormous explosion of energy that rushed into Ryu. Pain. Burning. Ryu faced the sky and roared loudly in pain. The power shot through him like a blade through his heart. The light from his energy ray became even more intense, obscuring most sight. The conflict of power rushed forward with great strength, pushing the dark ray back.
What? How?
Miria exclaimed.
This is the power of more than one god.
But she was adamant not to fall. Just as the conflict of rays was a mere foot from her, it stopped there and hung in balance. Ryu gritted his teeth. Just a bit more. His whole body ached. The power burned from inside. But he wasn't alone.
My All-Near!
Nina, Ray, and Dees cried together, as a white-hot lightning bolt burst from their outstretched hands.
Pew Kyo!
Pico shouted, letting out a wave of crimson gold flames.
Ragnarok!
Momo yelled, as comets struck the goddess. Their powers alone were not enough, but combined, it was enough to help. Ryu's energy ray advanced a little further. Miria's eyes flashed with anger. The conflict of powers was just half a foot in front of her.
I won't lose to you again!
She screamed, pushing the conflict an inch further. Gar, fighting the immense pressure from the power like his companions, closed his eyes, his mind focused. His blade, once belonging to Geist, burned with crimson flames.
Geist, my fallen brethren, with this final strike!
His eyes snapped open.
It will all end.
With a scream, he hurled the halberd forward like a javelin. The blazing halberd rushed past Ryu's head, past the combination of powers, slicing through the air. Miria's eyes widened. The blade stabbed her in the heart. She shrieked loudly in pain. Her dark powers disappeared completely. Ryu's white ray, strengthened by his companion's powers, rushed forward and engulfed her. An intense white light engulfed everything. The Dragon Prince growled. Farewell, Miria. And never rise again. Then, a great explosion. The air was calm, the surroundings was quiet. The Kaiser Dragon floated slowly to the ground below the platform that was the battlefield. Once he touched the floor, he flattened himself to allow his companions to descend. Nina, her eyes glistening with tears of relief. Ray, laughing uncontrollably at their victory. Momo, clapping her hands with joy. Honey, nodding in approval. Gar, smiling slightly with gladness. Pico, chuckling at their antics. Only Dees chose to stay behind. To be with her sister. But they knew. It had all ended. Ryu was glad. The wars were over. The Brood's warring destiny had come to an end. Once his companions were all safely on the ground, he suddenly reverting back to his human form in a soft light, and fell weakly to his knees.
Ryu!
Nina exclaimed. Gar's eyes narrowed with concern.
Are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine.
The Dragon Prince laughed softly.
Don't worry, I'm just a little tired.
The princess sighed in relief and smiled, kneeling next to him.
Take a good rest now, Ryu. Man, that was scary.
Ray cried.
I mean, fighting with a goddess? Who the hell's crazy enough to do that? You.
Momo said, grinning. Ryu smiled.
We all are. We fought against a goddess. But it is now over. No.
The guardian shook his head and corrected himself.
For you, it is only the beginning. It was a long and hard journey.
He smiled.
But we did the right thing, did we not?
Then, Gar began to glow.
Gar,
Ray said uncertainly. Gar shook his head ruefully.
As a guardian, my life must end here, with the goddess.
Ryu realized with a start, his heart cold with fear.
No, Gar. No.
He chuckled lightly.
I have taken possession of you from Balio and Sunder during the contest of champions. But now you are no longer in my care.
A sad smile formed on his face.
Go. From now on, you must walk on your own.
With that, he clasped his hands together in a silent prayer. Within a pillar of light, the guardian turned into stone. Still as a statue, having fulfilled his heart's final desire. His life was complete.
No, Gar.
Nina sobbed. Momo closed her eyes.
Gar. He knew it was coming.
Ray stated, shaking his head.
He was great, fighting against the powerful goddess when he was supposed to obey her.
Ryu gazed up at the statue of the guardian.
Thank you, Gar. Thanks for everything you've done for us.
With that, he bowed respectfully. The others followed suit. In memory of Gar, their companion who had defied the goddess at their side. But, at that very moment, the whole of Miria Station began to shake violently with a loud rumble, cutting their morning short. Miria sobbed on the plummeting platform, her face streaked with tears.
No. My world. I tried but it wasn't enough. What should I have done? What could I have done?
She faced the crumbling ceiling, yelling.
If there's truly a god, an entity watching over us, answer me. What should I have done with the brood?
Then, as though to answer her plea, a pillar of golden light shone onto the platform in front of her. From the golden light, Dee slithered forward, a quiet sadness on her face. She gasped.
Sister. It's for the best, Miria.
She shook her head.
You went too far in your attempt to wipe out the brood. Hurry, this way.
Ray yelled, as they all sped through the halls that were flashing red, a loud siren ringing above them.
What we need now is a rocket.
Momo cried.
Like the one my father built. We'll make it out somehow.
Nina shouted.
We've crossed the ocean, we've crossed the desert, we've fought a goddess, and we'll make it out of this place alive.
Pew. Pico agreed, with honey hanging on his head. Ryu nodded.
We'll make it. Although you came to this world initially because you like being in a position of power, you protected it until now.
Dee shook her head.
You've grown to love this world. Haven't you?
Miria nodded tearfully.
But in the end, this is something you children have to overcome, to go beyond, in order to walk on their own. All baby birds leave the nest someday.
The goddess continued sobbing.
Don't worry, they can take care of themselves better than you think. They, and the world, are stronger than we think. I'm sure of it.
She looked up slowly, her tear-filled eyes pleading.
Stay with me, sister.
Dee smiled fondly.
You've changed, Miria.
She slithered over to her sister, knelt by her side, and embraced her.
I'll be here with you. By your side.
She smiled as well.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.
And, together, they plunged into sea of flames. Into the explosion that removed every trace of the goddesses that were once there. On the surface of the sand, a sword stabbed into the ground, a trail of footprints leading away from it. The young man strode between the broken pieces of machinery, his footprints trailing behind him. A soft gust of wind blew. A short distance away, the princess waited for him. As soon as he was close enough, she walked alongside him, their footprints side by side. Her wings fluttered, like a butterfly's wings. There, at the top of a cliff, Engineer sat on the sand, worn out. Her robot doll lay contentedly on her lap. The half-tiger stood some distance away, his arms crossed, facing away. They followed his eyes. As they all gazed at the scenery before them, Ryu turned his eyes towards the sky. What awaited them beyond the cliff was a vast sea of sand. And a whole new beginning. End of chapter.